Most people believe that intelligence is about speaking louder, arguing better, or proving others wrong. But the most dangerous minds in history never played that game. They observed. They waited. They understood something most people never realize. People are predictable. Their emotions, their insecurities, their need for approval. Once you understand these patterns, you don't need to fight people. You simply position yourself better than them. This is what thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli understood centuries ago. Power rarely belongs to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the person who understands human nature the best. Today, we'll explore 10 psychological tricks, not to manipulate people maliciously, but to move through the world with awareness, strategy, and emotional control. Because once you see these patterns, you can never unsee them. 1. Let people reveal themselves. One of the most powerful psychological advantages you can develop is surprisingly simple. Let people talk. Most people reveal far more about themselves than they realize. Their fears, frustrations, ambitions, and insecurities often surface naturally in conversation. But this only happens when someone gives them the space to speak freely. The problem is that most people never create that space. In conversations, many feel an unconscious pressure to prove themselves quickly. They jump in with opinions. They interrupt. They explain their point before the other person finishes speaking. They believe speaking more makes them appear smarter or stronger. But in reality, the opposite is often true. The strategic mind takes a different approach. Instead of rushing to fill the silence, they listen carefully. They observe tone, body language, and the emotional shifts in someone's voice. They allow conversations to unfold naturally. In doing so, something interesting happens. People begin revealing themselves, not intentionally, but naturally. When someone feels heard, they tend to speak more openly. They talk about what frustrates them. They reveal what bothers their ego. Sometimes they even expose the things that make them insecure. And once those patterns appear, they're hard to hide. Consider a typical workplace meeting. A project has failed, and two coworkers begin discussing what went wrong. One immediately shifts into blame mode. They explain how someone else missed deadlines or ignored instructions. The other becomes defensive. They start listing all the things they did correctly, trying to protect their reputation. The room slowly fills with tension. But there's usually another person in the room, someone who isn't arguing, someone who isn't defending. They're simply listening. They watch how each person reacts under pressure. They notice who becomes emotional, who avoids responsibility, and who struggles to stay calm when challenged. By the end of the conversation, this quiet observer understands something valuable. Not just what happened with the project, but how each person behaves when things go wrong. And that knowledge is powerful, because in every professional environment and in most areas of life, decisions are often shaped by understanding people, not just facts. The person who listens carefully learns more about the room than the people fighting inside it. This idea echoes the philosophy of thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli, who believed that understanding human nature was one of the greatest strategic advantages a person could possess. You don't always need to dominate a conversation to gain influence. Sometimes the smartest move is simply to listen longer than everyone else. Because when people speak freely, they reveal patterns in their thinking, their emotions, and their priorities. And once you understand those patterns, you begin to see the situation far more clearly. In the end, knowledge rarely belongs to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the most patient mind. 2. Control your emotional reactions. Nothing reveals vulnerability faster than uncontrolled emotion. Anger, defensiveness, desperation. These reactions may feel natural in the moment, but psychologically they often give the other person something very valuable: control over you. The moment someone realizes they can provoke you, they gain invisible leverage. They know exactly which buttons to push. And once that pattern begins, it becomes easy for them to guide the interaction wherever they want. Think about a situation where someone criticizes or insults you in front of others. Most people react instantly. They interrupt. They raise their voice. They try to defend themselves immediately. From the outside, it looks like strength, but emotionally, it often signals the opposite. It shows that your reaction can be predicted. And predictability is something strategic thinkers avoid. Now imagine a different response. Someone makes a sharp remark toward you in a meeting or social gathering. Instead of reacting quickly, you pause. You stay calm. Maybe you simply look at them for a moment and respond with a quiet smile, or say nothing at all. Suddenly, the emotional rhythm changes. The person who expected a confrontation doesn't get one. The reaction they prepared for never happens. And psychologically, this creates uncertainty. Humans rely heavily on predictable responses. When someone breaks that pattern, the other person often becomes unsure of their own position. They may start questioning themselves. They may soften their tone. Sometimes they even try to recover from their own comment. The interesting part is that calmness often carries more authority than aggression. People instinctively respect those who can stay composed under pressure. It signals emotional discipline, and emotional discipline is rare. Strategic thinkers understand this deeply. They're not emotionless, and they don't suppress their feelings completely. Instead, they do something far more powerful. They choose when their emotions appear. They decide when to respond, how strongly to react, and whether a situation deserves their energy at all. Because real control isn't about controlling others. It begins with controlling yourself. 3. Never show your full strategy. One of the most common mistakes people make is revealing their entire plan too early. They talk openly about what they're going to do next. They explain their ambitions. They announce every step before it even happens. At first, this can feel natural. Sharing goals creates excitement and validation. People like hearing encouragement and recognition. But there's a hidden problem. The moment you reveal your entire strategy, you lose flexibility. Other people begin forming opinions about your plan. Some may doubt it, others may quietly compete with it, and a few may even try to block it. Suddenly, something that once existed only in your mind becomes exposed to unnecessary pressure. Strategic thinkers understand that not every intention needs an audience. Throughout history, many successful figures moved quietly while everyone else was focused somewhere else. One thinker who often emphasized the value of careful positioning was Niccolò Machiavelli. His observations about power often revolved around patience, timing, and strategic silence. The same principle appears in everyday life. Imagine you're planning a major career move. You've decided to apply for a leadership position, switch industries, or start something new. Many people would immediately begin talking about it, telling coworkers, friends, and acquaintances about their plans. But the strategic approach looks different. Instead of announcing it, you prepare quietly. You build new skills. You connect with the right people. You observe opportunities others overlook. While everyone else is discussing ideas, you're quietly building the ability to execute them. Then one day, the opportunity appears. And suddenly, everything changes. You accept a new position. You launch something new. You step into a role others didn't expect. People are surprised. Some might even call it luck. But it wasn't sudden, it was silent preparation. Strategic people think more like chess players than commentators. They don't describe every move before making it. They focus on positioning, patience, and timing. Because sometimes the most powerful strategy is the one no one sees coming. 4. Make others feel important. There's a quiet paradox in human psychology. People naturally trust those who make them feel valued, even when those people hold more authority, more experience, or more influence. Why does this happen? Because feeling respected lowers emotional defenses. When someone believes their opinion matters, they become more open, more cooperative, and far less resistant. Instead of seeing you as a competitor, they begin to see you as an ally. This is why skilled negotiators rarely dominate conversations. They don't rush to prove they're right. Instead, they spend time listening carefully and acknowledging the other person's perspective. That simple act creates connection. Imagine you're working with a colleague who tends to be difficult. They often defend their ideas aggressively and resist suggestions from others. Many people respond by challenging them directly. They argue. They push harder. And the tension grows. But a strategic approach looks different. Instead of confronting their ego, you acknowledge their experience. You might say something like, "You've been here longer than I have. What do you think is the best way for us to handle this situation?" In that moment, something shifts. The tension drops. Their need for recognition is satisfied. Instead of defending themselves, they begin thinking about solutions. And interestingly, they may even become more supportive of your ideas. This doesn't mean manipulating people with empty praise or fake compliments. It simply means recognizing a fundamental human need, one that has existed for centuries and was observed by thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli. People want to feel respected. They want to feel heard. They want to feel like they matter. When you understand that simple truth, conversations become easier, cooperation becomes natural, and influence becomes far more effective. Because in the end, one of the simplest ways to gain trust is to make others feel significant. 5. Speak less, mean more. Many people believe influence comes from speaking more. They explain every idea. They respond to every comment. They fill every moment of silence with words. But something interesting happens when someone talks constantly. Their words slowly lose impact. When everything is said out loud, nothing feels particularly important. The conversation becomes predictable. People begin listening less carefully because they assume another explanation is coming anyway. Authority quietly fades without the speaker even noticing. Now compare that to a different presence. Imagine a meeting where one person speaks very little. They listen. They observe. 20 minutes pass, and they've said almost nothing. Then, at the right moment, they speak. Just one clear, thoughtful sentence. Suddenly the room becomes attentive. People pause. They listen carefully. Why? Because silence creates something powerful, psychological gravity. When someone speaks rarely, their words feel deliberate. Others assume that if this person chose to speak now, the message must matter. Strategic thinkers understand this deeply. Communication is not about dominating the conversation or proving intelligence through constant explanation. It's about precision, choosing the right words, choosing the right moment, and sometimes choosing not to speak at all. This principle has been observed by many thinkers throughout history, including Niccolò Machiavelli, who often emphasized the value of restraint and careful positioning in both speech and action. Because when your words are rare, they become valuable. And when people recognize that value, they begin listening more closely every time you speak. In a world filled with constant noise, sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that speaks only when it matters. 6. Study people's hidden motivations. Most people don't openly admit what truly drives their behavior. They may talk about teamwork, responsibility, or professionalism. But beneath those words, there are often deeper motivations guiding their actions. Recognition, control, security, status, admiration. These quiet desires shape how people make decisions, react to challenges, and interact with others. And while people rarely explain these motivations directly, their behavior often reveals them clearly. If you begin observing carefully, patterns start to appear. For example, imagine a manager who constantly highlights their own contribution whenever the team succeeds. During meetings, they emphasize what they did and how their leadership made the difference. At first, it might seem like simple confidence, but look closer, and the motivation becomes clearer. They crave recognition. Now imagine another manager who closely monitors every small detail of a project. They double-check emails, question minor decisions, and insist on approving every step. Again, the deeper motivation isn't always obvious, but often it's a desire for control. Once you begin recognizing these patterns, something interesting happens. Interactions become easier. Instead of clashing with someone's personality, you begin understanding what drives it. And once you understand someone's incentives, you can navigate conversations more smoothly. This isn't about manipulation. It's about psychological awareness, a principle often observed by thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli, who believed that understanding human nature was one of the greatest strategic advantages a person could develop. When you see what truly motivates people, situations that once felt confusing start to make sense. Because beneath every action, every decision, and every conflict, there's usually a simple human desire quietly shaping the outcome. 7. Use strategic silence. Most people think power in a conversation comes from having the best argument, but often the real power comes from something much quieter. Silence. When someone criticizes you unfairly, your first instinct is usually to respond immediately. You want to explain, defend, or correct the accusation right away. It feels natural, but reacting too quickly can actually make the situation worse. It adds energy to the conflict and gives the other person exactly what they expected, an emotional reaction. Instead, try something different. Pause, take a breath, look thoughtful for a moment, and allow the silence to exist. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. Most people are conditioned to fill silence quickly. But that brief pause creates an interesting psychological shift. Silence introduces pressure. The person who just spoke suddenly becomes aware of the quiet space their words created. Without immediate resistance, they begin replaying their own statement in their mind. Sometimes they start questioning it. Sometimes they soften their tone. And sometimes they even clarify or correct themselves. Professional negotiators understand this dynamic very well. When someone makes an offer in a negotiation, experienced negotiators often resist the urge to respond right away. Instead, they stay silent. That silence can feel surprisingly heavy. The other person becomes uncomfortable and may begin adjusting their offer just to break the tension. In many cases, the deal improves without a single argument being made. Strategic thinkers recognize that silence isn't empty. It communicates control, patience, and confidence. Observers have noted similar principles in the writings of Niccolò Machiavelli, who often emphasized restraint and timing in both speech and action. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't a louder voice. It's the quiet confidence to say nothing at all. 8. Let others take the spotlight. In competitive environments, recognition often becomes a silent battle. People want their ideas noticed. They want their efforts acknowledged. They want their contributions to stand out. So naturally, many individuals push themselves into the spotlight whenever possible. They speak louder, present their achievements, and compete for attention. But the smartest players sometimes choose a very different strategy. They step back. They allow others to take public credit. They let someone else present the idea, lead the conversation, or receive the recognition in front of the group. At first, this might seem like a loss, but in reality, it can be a powerful position. Because visibility often comes with something people forget to consider: responsibility and scrutiny. The moment someone becomes the center of attention, they also become the first person people question when things go wrong. Expectations rise, pressure increases, and criticism often follows. Meanwhile, the quiet strategist gains something more valuable. They gain freedom. Freedom to observe how people react. Freedom to understand the dynamics of the group. Freedom to influence decisions without becoming the obvious target. History repeatedly shows that many influential figures preferred subtle influence rather than obvious authority. Thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli often observed that visible power can attract resistance, while quiet influence can move situations more smoothly. When you become the center of attention, you also become the center of opposition. People begin measuring themselves against you. They challenge your ideas more aggressively because your position is highly visible. But when someone else stands in the spotlight, the environment feels less confrontational. And in that quieter position, you gain something rare: the ability to understand the room without becoming its target. Sometimes the smartest move is not stepping forward. Sometimes it's letting someone else stand in the light while you guide the direction from the shadows. 9. Create the illusion of choice. Human beings naturally resist commands. The moment someone feels forced to do something, their mind often pushes back, even if the request is reasonable. It's not always about the task itself. It's about the feeling of losing control. People want autonomy. They want to believe their actions come from their own decisions. This is why choices are so powerful. Even small choices can transform the tone of a conversation. Imagine telling a team member, "Finish this task today." The instruction is clear, but it might trigger resistance. The person may feel pressured or controlled, and that feeling can quietly affect their motivation. Now imagine a slightly different approach. Instead of giving a direct command, you say, "Would you prefer finishing this today or tomorrow morning?" Something subtle changes. The task still needs to be done, but now the person feels involved in the decision. Their sense of control remains intact, and the resistance fades. This simple shift appears in many areas of life: leadership, parenting, negotiation, and even everyday conversations. By offering choices, you respect a basic human need: the desire to feel independent. Strategic thinkers understand this psychological pattern. Rather than forcing compliance, they guide decisions in a way that feels natural to others. Observations about human behavior like this were often discussed by thinkers such as Niccolò Machiavelli, who believed that understanding human nature made influence far more effective. The key idea is not manipulation, it's awareness. When people feel they are choosing their path, cooperation becomes easier and interactions become smoother, because in the end, people rarely like being controlled, but they almost always respond well to feeling in control. 10. Master the art of timing. Sometimes the difference between success and failure has nothing to do with intelligence, talent, or even strategy. It comes down to timing. You can have the right idea, the right words, and the right plan, but if they appear at the wrong moment, their impact disappears. Timing quietly shapes how people receive information. Consider a simple example. Imagine someone on your team makes a mistake that affects a project. Your first instinct might be to address it immediately, especially if others are present. But confronting someone publicly often triggers a defensive reaction. The person feels embarrassed, their ego feels threatened, and instead of listening, they focus on protecting themselves. The message gets lost in the tension. Now imagine a different approach. You wait. Later, when emotions have settled and the environment is calm, you speak to them privately. The conversation becomes more thoughtful, less emotional, and far more productive. The same message now has a better chance of being understood. Timing also plays a critical role in opportunity. Many people rush their moves. They announce ideas too early, push plans before others are ready, or force progress when the environment isn't prepared to support it. Strategic thinkers move differently. They observe the situation carefully. They study the mood of the room, the dynamics of the environment, and the readiness of the people involved. Then they wait. And when the moment is right, they act with clarity and confidence. This kind of patience has long been recognized as a powerful advantage by observers of human behavior, including Niccolò Machiavelli, who often emphasized the importance of understanding when to move and when to hold back. Because patience isn't about doing nothing. It's about positioning yourself for the right moment. And when that moment finally arrives, a well-timed action can accomplish far more than 100 rushed attempts. In strategy and in life, timing often decides everything. Understanding strategy isn't about controlling people. It's about understanding human nature. When you learn to observe more, react less, and move with patience, the way you experience the world begins to change. Conversations feel clearer, conflicts become easier to navigate, and situations that once felt chaotic start to make sense. The ideas we discussed today echo the observations of thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli, who believed that awareness of human behavior is one of the greatest forms of power. So the next time you enter a room, don't rush to speak. Watch, listen, think, because sometimes the person who understands the room the best quietly shapes its outcome.